How you doing, family? I hope this isn't too dark. It is evening time right now, so I'm trying to get this done before it gets too dark for me to video anything. There's some things I wanted to get off my chest, and I think now is about as good a time as any. As you can see, I'm in my home away from home in a truck. I've been out here since October 15th, and needless to say, I'm getting kind of crispy. But in all the time that I've been out here, I feel like I need to say something about what's going on in my life. Those of you who knew me a year ago, I'm not the same person I was a year ago. I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago. Truth be known, I'm not the same person I was 2 months ago. Everybody in my life knows that this has been an incredibly difficult year. Ups and downs have been insane. The devil's attacked me. The devil has come against me in ways that I never thought he would. He's taken more from me this year than I thought he would, but he's given me in equal measure. In fact, he's given to me greater than anything that was taken from me. So let me tell you a story. Some weeks back, on a Tuesday, I woke up and my face was swelled up and in pain, bad tooth. I don't know if you've ever been there, but I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate on my job. I called my truck dispatcher and I told her what was going on. I told her how much it hurt, and she said, "We'll get you home as quick as we can." She got me home she got me back to Oklahoma on a Thursday, and I got my load delivered and got home on a Thursday, which was record time considering I was in Tennessee. It was good. So I got my load switched out and I got home. The interesting thing was, when I got into town, I realized that the swelling and pain that was in my jaw was gone. I mean, I went on ahead and kept my dentist appointment, but it was gone. I mean, there was no pain, there was no tenderness, it was gone. And when I got home and I was relaxing that evening after I got home, my youngest son Robert, called me up. It was midnight. He calls me up. The first words out of my mouth was, "You do realize it's midnight." Not high, not anything else. It was, "You do realize it's midnight." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Dad," he says, "Lawson, my grandson, who's at the time was 6, 7 weeks old. He says, Lawson's crying, he won't sleep. I think he's having nightmares, but I don't know. And I was wondering if we could bring him by." And I was like, "Yeah, bring him by, you know. You don't have to call first, just show up. It's my grandson. 3 in the morning, don't care. You know." So he shows up. My daughter-in-law, Lenny, she was exhausted. Bobby was exhausted, I could tell. We took the baby and I put him on my chest, my bare chest. I know now why. Now, didn't know then, but I know now why I was praying for him. I started praying for him as soon as I had him on my chest. And aside from a couple of dirty diapers, he just settled right down and went to sleep on my chest, you know. Felt warm, but he didn't feel terribly warm. For 6 hours, that's where he stayed. Every time I'd look down at him until I finally went to sleep myself, finally passed out, I don't know how long. Bobby had gone to bed, Marie was in bed. Marie was on the couch next to me, you know. I prayed for him. almost constantly. Every time I look down at him, I pray for strength for him and grace. Now, I want to say that I always thought that I was a Christian. I thought I was saved. But I also know where my heart was, and I had a lot of bad stuff in my heart. I had hatred. I had unhealthy lusts. I had all kinds of bad things in my life. So if people ask me where I was going when I died, I told them, I'm going to hell. The way things stand, I'm going to hell. And I firmly believe that. So I sit there with my baby grandson on my chest, who, I'll be honest with you, because of some of the things that were going on in my life, he really is one of the few things that was giving me the reason to keep breathing. As soon as he was born, it was like getting hit by lightning when I first held him. He's just such an amazingly beautiful child, and he's perfect. Well, I fell asleep, and the next morning, really early, my daughter-in-law had a doctor's appointment, so they took the baby and they went up to their house to change clothes, and apparently his fever had increased overnight to the point where it was dangerous. He, while they had him at home, I guess he went into convulsions. And they called my wife. My wife said, you got to get him into the hospital now. You know, don't mess around, don't wait, get him in there now. So they did. They went and they took him straight to the hospital. Hospital tested him and found out that he had bacterial meningitis. In fact, I was later told that when he got to the hospital, he was all but dead. There was no pulse in his heart, in his extremities, just his heartbeat, but no pulse out here. His skin was mottled. If any of you have ever watched a person die, you know what that means. But they stabilized him, got first round of antibiotics in him, and life flighted him to Children's Hospital, St. Francis Children's Hospital in Tulsa. And my wife and I left the house. We beat the life flight to St. Francis, and we were there when he got there. And we were, by the time they let us in, they had him all hooked up. He was on an intubation machine. It was 6 or 8 different medicine pumps. They had a line going into his carotid, and then they had a line going into his femoral artery that they were using to put medicine to him. It's the most terrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. That was Friday. Saturday morning, about 1 o'clock, I woke up because I stayed at the hospital that first week. I woke up and there was 8 or 9 nurses and doctors running around the room like somebody kicked an anthill. And I asked what was going on. They said that his eyes, one pupil was great big, one pupil was small, and they weren't adjusting. They weren't reacting to light. They said it's sign that the swelling in his brain has gotten worse. They couldn't maintain his blood pressure. They had him on norepinephrine and epinephrine both, just to keep his heart rate high enough to keep blood pressure high enough to keep the blood going through his brain. His heart was running for hours at almost 190 beats per minute. And the doctor said, she came in and she said, I've been trying to talk to your children. without actually saying it. I've been trying to bring them around to the fact that they need to do a DNR. They need to look at a DNR, because if when his heart stops, because he can't keep this pace up, when his heart stops, we can start it again. But the brain damage that will be caused by his heart stopping for any length of time is not something that the baby will recover from. And I went to Bobby and I told him about it. And they told us that she told me that he needed to make the decision soon, because in realistic terms the baby only had maybe between a few minutes and an hour before his heart would stop. And he only had about an 8% chance of survival. And if he did survive, he would have brain damage, and that there's going to be, he'd either probably be blind or he'd be deaf, or both. He may not be able to feed himself. This is all the things they told us, was a likely outcome. Sorry, it appears it's getting darker in here. I'll see if I can get some more light going, but best I can do. When I went to Bobby and he went to his wife, they decided that they would do a DNR. The baby just kept getting worse. They were having a harder and harder time holding and keeping his blood pressure up. So Bobby and Lenny made the decision that they would go on ahead and do it. Now, I would like to say that my faith, the faith of a 47-year-old man who's seen a lot of stuff in this world, I'd like to say that my faith was strong, and that, it could handle what was going on, and I could be there. I was a source of strength for my children. But if I said those things to you, it'd be a lie. I have a better than average grasp of the Bible and the things in it. I have complete trust that it is historically an accurate document. I always believed that Christ was real. I believed in everything about his account. Never had any trouble with the legitimacy of it. But I can't ever say that I ever felt him in here. I mean, I've had emotional responses to Christ and to his story. But it's never made a change in me. And so I raged. I prayed to him, but I raged at him. I said, he brought me home. I got to thinking about it, and the way he brought me back, and the timing that he brought me back. I remember just praying. I was hitting my knees, and I said, Lord, this doesn't make sense. Why would you bring me home just to say goodbye to this little guy? This doesn't make sense. One of the disciples, when Christ asked him to follow him, he said, let me go home and bury my father. He says, let the dead bury the dead. He's not interested in letting a person go home just to say goodbye to someone who's dying. That's not what he's about. He's about the work of the living. Now, like I said, I wish I could say my faith was strong, but it wasn't. My daughter and my son, my daughter-in-law and my son, My daughter-in-law, who's 19 years old, 19, showed me what true faith is. There's her baby laying on this tiny little bed. He's got tubes running down his throat. He's got tubes in his neck and his legs. He's not moving. He hadn't moved for hours. Heavily sedated. On an intubation machine. Tears in her eyes. She's speaking love, life, and God's word over her son. Fearing the worst, but willing to put her faith 100% in Christ. Robert, I was still grieving, mourning the loss of my grandson before it ever happened. I told God, I've never been one to make deals with God. God, if you'll just do this, I'll do this. I'll worship you. I'll do whatever you want. Just do, I've never been one to try that. And I didn't this time. I said, God, if that baby's heart stops in this hospital, so does mine. If he doesn't leave, I don't leave. Because if you brought me all the way home just so that I can watch my grandson die, we're done. We're done. Thankfully, the Bible says that blasphemy of Christ and blasphemy of the Father can be forgiven, thank gosh. Thank God. My son came out and he reminded me of my place. He said, Dad, I can't do this without you. I need you with me. I need you praying with me. And both of them brought this wonderful woman into my life. Her name's Elizabeth Inman. Mrs. Inman is a tremendous warrior for Christ. Stronger than I could hope to possibly be at this point. She gives me a star to shoot for. She gives me a path to follow. But she came out and she prayed with me, and she reminded me of God's promises. And when I was blaming myself the most, because I made a lot of mistakes in my past, in my history, I have violated every commandment under God at one time or another in my life. Without fail, every one of them. But she gave me hope. And then I realized something. The doctor had given that baby an hour, and it had turned into 3 hours. I went back in there, and we had all been hitting we'd put out the call. We put out the call to everybody that we knew. Text message to everybody about what was going on. And the prayer responses that just kept coming in and coming in from all over. I had a friend who was in church that Saturday when I first put out the prayer request. He was in church leading. They follow the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles holiday. And so they were having that holiday, and apparently all of their churches are all connected. So when he put out the prayer request for his church, it didn't go out to just his church. There were 30,000 followers of Christ that all took up the prayer for my grandson all at one time, and that was just one person. I've had people in Skiatook, Oklahoma that don't know my children, but they know Lawson, and he was in their prayer requests for their church and their prayer chains. 1 hour had become 3. And they checked his eyes, and guess what? His eyes were the same size again. And they were reacting, slowly, but they were reacting, which was a good sign. And it was the first positive sign we'd had, except for the fact that his little heart never stopped. His heart kept beating, and his blood pressure stabilized. And 8 o'clock that night, they took him off of the norepinephrine. And a few hours later, they took him off the epinephrine. His heart rate was stabilized. It was doing its own thing. His blood pressure was doing its own thing, and he was coming back. That next night, he spent most of the night with the intubation machine turned off. He was breathing on his own. Wasn't easy, but he did it. They put it back on for the next few days just so that to give him help, so it wouldn't stress his body. But when they took him off of that norepinephrine, the man had been walking around in my skin. I told to God that if my grandson died, I wouldn't leave that hospital. And I'll tell you something, the man who was Keith Ent did not leave that hospital. I died there at the hospital. Or, let's say, the old man that I was died. And I rose up a true child of Christ. From that moment on Saturday, doctor would come in and she'd say, okay, he's getting better, but you got to understand there's going to be brain damage. There's going to be damage. No, there's not. My mind was always telling me, no, there's not. God doesn't do things halfway. God saved this child. He brought this child back. He's not going to do a halfway job. I'd hear people around me say, don't matter what's wrong with him. Don't matter. We'll take it. He's alive. We'll take it. I said, that's not it. We were, as Elizabeth Inman told me, she said, and this is something that I will take to my grave, she says, in this world, in this situation, we are in a battle between facts and God's truth. Now the facts are that my grandson should have died. He should have died on that table. I had a doctor come to me. One of the doctors told me, he says, he didn't tell me this is rare. He said this doesn't happen. Babies who are this far gone do not come back this fast. He was ready to leave the hospital physically almost a week before they let him come home. The only reason they stayed there is because they wanted him to finish a 21-day regimen on the antibiotics that they were giving him. Now, everything that happened, there's 2 separate miracles that happened. The way he brought me home and the way he healed my grandson. And I remember saying that I thought there was going to be a purpose to it. But I couldn't think of what the purpose would be. I couldn't think of the good that would come from it. But it's a platitude you give people. And when this first happened, I said, look, I don't know why this is happening, but God will use it for good. Well, let me tell you about the good. I've been on this road now 5 weeks since before he got out of the hospital. I can't listen to rock and roll. I don't even listen to country anymore. If it's not gospel, or it's not, if it's not something Christian, I can't take it in. I can't watch the movies that used to interest me, don't interest me. All I want to do is absorb things from God. Am I perfect? No, but there was things that in my life, that unhealthy things that they were sinful, they were unhealthy, and God removed those from my life to the point where I hit a button on my phone out of reflex. And when not even the material that I was looking for popped up, it hadn't even popped up. It was just a screen in preparation, and I got sick to my stomach until I closed that screen. And I was like, okay, apparently he doesn't want me to do that anymore, And then I got to thinking, I was like, well, it was just a reflex to do it. It's not that I want to anymore. And then I turned on Netflix because I'm in a truck, and if I'm not running, I've got to do something. And I tried to look up something on the internet to watch, and I came across a Ron White video. And I used to like him when he was doing the tame stuff, but his stuff is so blue now that I can't, it's just vulgar. And the first vulgar joke that popped up, I almost threw up until I shut him off. God has removed from my life those things that are cancerous to my spirit. I'm not interested in them. I have gone, in the last 6 weeks, I have gone from one end of this country to the other, telling Lawson's story and praising my God. Telling Lawson's story at every truck stop, every depot that I stop at to get loads, everywhere that I can get somebody to stand still for 10 minutes while I tell them about my grandson and my Christ and His power. Am I perfect? No. I am still a child of flesh, so I fight my own habits. Have not tamed this thing yet. Working on it. But I find myself unable to hold the grudges that I've held for years. I have been mending fences with as much of my family as I have offended and abandoned in the past years. I know that my life can have no peace unless I make peace with my past. I don't know where you are in life, but I'll tell you, there's no place that you are. There's no hole that's so dark that Christ can't lift you out of it. You have to sometimes hit bottom. I did. I hit the very bottom of my soul. And He raised me up a new man. Anyway, guys, I hope you had the faith or the fortitude to stick around and listen to this whole thing. I hope that something I had to say will help somebody out there or touch somebody out there. If not, it's still something I needed to get off my chest. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. God bless you all. Good night.